Thank you very much. So the way in which this session is designed, just to say a few words, because this is a long session where we have 6 papers, we're going to have 2 moderators. I'm going to moderate the first part of the session, and then Paul Mucichescu will moderate the second one. So I'll be the moderator for Mihai, Olga, and Dionysios, and then Paul for Christos, Johannes, and Ioann Dura. I have the pleasure of introducing now Mihai, who holds a PhD in systematic theology from the University of Bucharest with a thesis on the pneumatology of Saint Symeon, the New Theologian. And he also holds a Master of Advanced Studies in Ecumenism from the University of Geneva. And now he's working for the Educational and Youth Department of the Orthodox Archbishopric of Bucharest. His interests lay in the areas of pneumatology, especially on the topic concerning the awareness of the Holy Spirit according to the writings of the Philocalic Fathers, eschatology, particularly on the preparatory character of the ascetical life for the eternal life in God's kingdom, and lately in the relationship between culture and ecclesial liturgical expression. Now, because Mihai has uploaded his presentation already, and I hope you're all familiar with his presentation, the only thing I'm going to ask him to do will be to give us a short 5-minute summary, just to go again over the main argument, and then we are going to start the discussion. The floor is yours, Mihai.
Thank you. Can everyone hear me? Yep. Okay, so the title of my presentation is Body's Participation in a Quest for Deification. Does it help? What I had in mind is the somehow embedded idea in the Orthodox or probably the Christian tradition that when starting on the spiritual journey, one has to put on mute his body. And that's not only because it was weaker and it gave us the impression that it is the body of death, but also it gave the impression that it slows down the spiritual running envisioned by humanity. Hence, this my presentation is going to, describe the understanding of the body as a place of revelation and divine purpose. For this reason, the paper had 3 parts, and in the first part of the paper, I had to discuss some of the differences in the New Testament regarding the understanding of the human being, the differences between body and meaning the flesh, the soul, and the spirit, and to resume the New Testament's understanding of the body, I had to point to the first Corinthians letter of Saint Paul, where he has a distinction between the physical body and meaning the ensouled or animated way of life, the animal way of life, and the spiritual body, the soma pneumatikon, which in the age to come is the imperishable unity beyond composition or dissolution. So in the framework of New Testament, it is somehow a provisional dualism, not of the Gnostic sort, but it is a provisional dualism because, as Saint Paul says, flesh and blood cannot inherit the kingdom of God. In the second part of the paper, I describe how the our body, whether it reminds us that the body is a bad condition to be in, or it makes us aware about the spiritual bondage that exists in this world. The Christian thought emphasized that the Logos, the Son of God, became flesh, and the body as well is the temple of the Holy Spirit. Hence, the material order, and specifically the human body, has a central place in God's creative, redemptive, and perfective economies. In other words, as I highlighted, our bodies are a central part of our divinely proposed human nature that makes it a site of cosmological and soteriological importance. And this divine purpose, I argue, is stressed by the Holy Father, and is connected with the fact that the seeds, or the reasons of entire creation, have their roots in the eternal Logos of God. So the Logos decided in eternity to become flesh and nothing, and not another material substance. That means that the human body can and must be a medium through which we discover some significant aspect of the perfect union that we are called to have with one another and with the divinity. Now, on the third part of the paper, I highlighted the fact that we gain our knowledge, the spiritual knowledge and practical knowledge, through our bodies. So the knowledge that we need at the start of our deification process is related to our existence in body. So the body creates the context for the human being to learn. In a sense, it gives the space to incarnate a specific rational, spiritual orientation in practical habits, so to understand the world around us. And for this reason, I consider that the body puts in front of the human being the possibility to gain the practical knowledge of the spiritual realm within oneself. And this knowledge will strengthen the desire to unite with God. So the conclusion is that in the body, one learns what it is to be God in Christ through the Holy Spirit. And by way of conclusion, I would like to argue that in the process of deification, Christians should not be seduced by the model of escape or control, although a lot of time we do not like to be material. As Father John Bear once told, we live as hedonists and die as Platonists. So the dream of liberty from the body still haunts our Platonic, classic, and Christian culture. In this presentation, the reflection set forth an attempt to discern how our body participates in our deification, considering its vulnerability and divine purpose. The body is not to be subordinated, but rather mindfully inhabited. Our bodily practices should not intend to reduce God's knowledge to a set of skills or capacities, but rather to reveal the teleological orientation inscribed in our body towards Christ, the incarnate Word, and as well make us aware of the vulnerability and mortality of our being. And it is this very vulnerability of our body that the Logos assumed in the incarnation, together with all the horizons and richness enshrouded in it, that finally orients human desire to its purpose, and that being the union with God. So hopefully I limit it to 5 minutes. And,
Thank you very much for your presentation, Mihai, for reminding us, refreshing our memory. I have plenty of questions, but I don't want to abuse my privilege of moderator. So I see that Viorel has a question here, so we'll start with him.
Good afternoon, everyone. Mihai, thank you very much for your presentation and for showing that the body is essential in the process of deification and what Eastern Christian tradition had to say on this subject. I have two somehow interrelated questions. The first one, is the rejection of the body something that pertains to the past of Christian tradition, or it is also a contemporary issue? So who are these people, Orthodox people, who downplays the role of the body? And the second one, what would be the larger implications for theology and spirituality if we claim that the body is important in the process of deification? What would this mean for the relationship of theology with the created world, with the larger society, with the realm of politics, economics, culture, and so on and so forth? Or how could, or in what sense, a re-emphasis on this topic change the way we are doing theology and approach the realities of the secular world?
Thank you. Thank you for your questions. Now, I think that is this rejection of the body is something that is common somehow to our, I don't know, classic, antique Christian culture, Platonist culture, and today I'm inclined to say that this kind of rejection is being seen more on the monastic realm, but not only on that part. I have friends and colleagues living in our society that still sees the body as something to be controlled or subordinated, something, if not bad in itself, given the fact that they all relate to the Christian understanding of the body as the temple of the Holy Spirit. They somehow seem to see the deification as a sort of just the a participation only of the soul, or deification only of the spiritual part of the human being. Now, at the second point, I think that if our relationship with our body it would be a rational one and a mindful one, that would create some consequences in our relationship with the, I don't know, let's say with our environment. I think that it will have some ecological implications. To understand that we live in a world where everything is to be shared and not to be controlled, and that would apply not only to the environment but also to the politic, and also to the way we understand others that are different, have different perspective than ours. These are the things that I have in mind when thinking when thinking to a correct relationship with our body and with ourselves. Desire to understand the other and to give time for something to be established or done, exactly as we do with our body. Give the body time to learn something, or to see to learn something. I think that's the thing that I have in mind.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, who would like to ask another question? Zurab, please.
Thank you, Mihai, for a very interesting presentation. And I think that you correctly emphasized that precisely deification of human body is a hallmark of Christian doctrine and theology when we compare to Platonism and all ancient, different forms of ancient thought. I have two questions. So how should we think practically about the difference Apostle Paul draws, this distinction Apostle Paul draws between the psychic body and pneumatic body, so spiritual and psychic, how to transform translate. And this difference, I mean, in practical terms, because you correctly stress that this causes many misunderstandings. For example, in ascetic tradition, we may focus on Paul's passage when he says that now Christ has no blood and flesh anymore, so flesh is something a locus of sin and so on. And so this is my question. And then in the end of your presentation, you mentioned about bodily vulnerability. So my question would be, how can we use this bodily vulnerability how can we integrate this vulnerability in our practical ascetical lives? So it's a bit, what kind of role does it play, and how can we use it in correct? Thank you.
Okay, so I will start with the second one, because it was at the ending side of my paper. Initially, I thought to when writing the paper, the presentation, I thought to have a larger part of on the theme of vulnerability, but I had to shorten the presentation. Well, I think that when one realizes the vulnerability and the mortality through one's body, I think that at that moment in his body and in the human being might arise a sort of contrition, a start of repentance, understanding that although we are a creature of God, we are limited to a certain degree. Our body is limited, and of course that creates some difficulties in our in our life in the world. But I think that that would be the main aspect, integrating aspect in our ascetical life, when realizing, being aware about your own vulnerable condition. And that is not done only through the I thought as well at the fact that when the Desert Fathers were speaking about, I mean, they were acting, they were using some ascetical tools related to their body, exercising tools. They as well were trying to make their disciples or themselves aware of their vulnerable position, in order for them to start sort of mourning or contrition in their spiritual life. So I think that the vulnerability might lead us to contrition and to repentance. And on your first question, sorry, but I didn't get it very well.
I can repeat it. So I meant that in the first part of your presentation, you stressed about the difference in Paul's epistles between psychic soul, so body which we have now, sinful body, and then the future body, this pneumatic spiritual body. So there is difference, and theoretically we can understand this, but how can we apply this difference in practical sense in our present life? Or maybe it's not possible because we just should wait for this future body and that's all what you can do. I don't know.
Just try to see that seeds that is inside ourselves as animated or installed a body in order to have it resurrected in the new age to come. I don't know how I mean that I think that we should observe the spiritual men and women and how they act in order to see how that difference is possible in this age.
Thank you very much, Mihai. I'm happy to see that Olga is has managed to join us, and her connection is better.
Olga
Other
asked me at the beginning of the presentation to assume the area of Saint Nikolai. I didn't sing it by now, but I think that at the end of the day.
I'll ask again all of you to switch off your mics, please. Thank you. Okay. Other questions, please. Christos.
Mikhail, thank you very much for both the presentation and your brief talk. Well, what struck me is that you spoke about our ability to derive knowledge through our body. I found this very, very interesting because currently I'm doing research on Christos, and when he speaks about knowledge and how to derive it, then it is always connected with faith, which is a function of the soul. And in your talk, you said it's not the soul, it's a true knowledge later. So could you please elaborate a bit on this? Is it soul or body?
Sorry, I didn't understand. I think that some of the microphones are still on, and
okay, I will repeat.
Yeah.
Can you hear now better?
Yeah. Yep.
Thank you very much, first of all, for your brief talk and the presentation. Well, what I said is that I find very, very interesting what you said about our ability to derive knowledge through our body. And why this is interesting is that nowadays, currently, I'm doing research on Christos, who very much stresses that it is faith, as opposed to, body, faith, which is a function of the soul, and through faith, you get knowledge of God. While you stress this knowledge through the body. So could you please elaborate on this?
Yeah, sure. Thank you for your question. I might have been influenced by the modern neurology or studies in neurology, and made somehow a difference between the practical knowledge and the knowledge that the theoretical knowledge. And I've started. I was thinking to, let's say, when I have a kid, a young girl, and living with her day by day, I was aware about the fact that she learns when she bumps things. It's a sort of practical knowledge, and I think that could apply to our relationship with the body as well. Of course, it is the fate an ability of the soul to contemplate and to know things through contemplation. But as well, it is a harsh and a difficult way of learning things by by our relationship with the world that is around us. And that is the idea that was behind that remark that I made in my paper. I do not disregard the knowledge that one gained through contemplation or through prayer, so through faith, but I think that the practical one, the practical knowledge, which is, I think that is hard because it's difficult and implies the fact that you might be hurt in your flesh, might be the one that one needs at a specific stage in their spiritual journey. So I don't put them in contrast. I just highlighted the practical one because I wanted to emphasize the relation, the participation of the body. And,
yeah. Okay. Super. Now,
yeah.
Now
so
I see it makes sense. So there's a one interrelation of body and soul in this way, right? Okay,
sure.
wonderful.
Yeah,
Okay.
I just emphasize the one side. Yeah.
Thank you very much for your questions. Let's see if we have another last question, and then we're going to move to Olga.
I have a question also.
Okay, go ahead, Olga, please.
But you can ask. I missed some part of the presentation, but could you explain once again when you speak about the rejection of the body as an obstacle to spiritual life? What exactly is the source of this thinking? Because is it a patristic source or what?
I think
what
that
exactly do you mean?
I'm inclined to think that it is our Platonic heritage that influenced the development of our classical and Christian culture. And that remains in the patristic and in the monastic tradition as well. So I think that is somehow a remaining of the Platonist ideas. That it is somehow related as well with the provisional dualism that I emphasize that exists in our New Testament writings, especially in Saint Paul, but as well in the first epistle, the first epistle of Saint Peter.
Okay, I'm going to jump in with another question because I think we didn't start when we should have. So my question for Mihai would be the following. I mean, I have a colleague here who's working on. Olga, could you please turn off the mic? Thank you. I have a colleague here who's working on the how he's trying to conceive a way of speaking about the life of the souls after death. He's saying, okay, you have the possibility of talking about purgatory, or as we do in Orthodoxy, about a place where people go either in a provisional hell or provisional heaven. Now, his question is, but doesn't this very idea of a provisional heaven, let's say, entails a certain dualism? Doesn't this mean we are actually, although we speak about deification of the body, at the end of the day, we're preaching something that contradicts the idea of a heaven that exists now before the second judgment?
Yeah. Somehow I agreed somehow with him based on the fact that it is somehow a provisional state by the final judgment and the final resurrection, when the body is going to be resurrected as well, the spiritual body that we're talking about. So yeah, it might be by that time a sort of provisional dualism still.
Okay. Thank you. I think now Olga will not. Thank you very much, Mihai, for your presentation and for the patience to answer all our questions.
Glad to be here.
Now I know we should start with Olga's presentation, but unfortunately her connection is not very good. So she decided that she's going to postpone her talk for tomorrow. If that's correct, that I understood correctly. So that now we would like to continue with Dionysios.
Hello, everyone.
Hello.
Hello, everyone.
Nice to have you here, Dionysios.
It's great for me also.
Thank you very much for being here. And just to introduce you a little bit for those who don't know you, Dionysios has studied has a doctorate in the thinking of Saint Maximus the Confessor from the University of Paris for Sorbonne. He studied classics and theology at the University of Athens, completed a master's degree in late antiquity philosophy and Byzantine history at the University of London, King's College London, and he also has a master's degree in Byzantine literature at University of Paris, Sorbonne, Paris 4. He's also a teaching fellow at the Faculty of Theology in Athens. And as you already know, you're already familiar, his talk was about becoming human through becoming divine, Theosis in the theology of Saint Gregory of Nyssa and Saint Maximus the Confessor. I'll ask you to refresh our memory a little bit, like for 5 minutes, to do a summary of your argument, and then we're going to start taking questions.
Great, thank you very much for your presentation. And I would like to thank also Olga and say that it is a very nice habit to have only 5 minutes talk and then proceed with discussion after having seen the videos. The topic of this paper was some antinomies in patristic thought. Of course, deification, divinization has two poles, the becoming divine while also remaining human. And I have tried to detect the distinction between salvation and divinization, which happened nevertheless at the same time. By salvation, we mean the full humanity, the salvation of full humanity, the manifestation of what it is to be human. But this happens paradoxically at the time when someone becomes also something other than oneself, namely God by grace. This antinomy was formulated by fathers like St. Gregory and St. Maximus in many ways, also with philosophical concepts and notions. Father Alexis yesterday has spoken a lot about the epectasis of Gregory of Nyssa, and in his book he has made a critique to an exaggeration of the epectasis, trying to counterbalance it with other elements. And one could see this as an evolution in patristic thought. First, we have Origen, and Origen spoke too much about the initial fall of the intellect, which was due to chorus, to a sort of fulfillment and boredom. And it is for this reason that St. Gregory of Nyssa corrected Origen by speaking about an encounter of the finite man with the infinite God. And this took the form of a perpetual progress. The encounter between the finite and the infinite means a perpetual progress. This was too dynamic. This was dynamic. That is the modern and the good point of it, side of it. But St. Maximus had arguably seen it as too dynamic, and he has corrected St. Gregory by this paradox of the ever-moving repose, where we have at the same time progress and repose. And I will conclude now. And one would say that the basic antinomies are antinomies between activity and passion, pein and paschin in Greek. So divinization is a passion because, according to Saint Maximus, there is no logos in human nature for becoming divine. This is something supernatural and it exceeds human nature. So as it is supernatural, it is a passion. We are passive in the divinization. At the same time, this passion does not mean a celebration of passivity because it coincides with the fullest possible actualization of human nature. It's like having the sun and the stars, so to speak. There might be a suffering of the light of the sun by the stars, but the stars, or maybe the sun and the moon, the sun might efface the moon, but at the same time, the moon has this light. And so this divination, according to St. Maximus the Confessor, is seen as a peak of human activity at the exact time when we suffer this divinization. The other antinomy between movement and repose, as I have already said, there is some problematic about the natural, personal, and energetic sides of divinization. And but I will leave it at that in order to have the discussion.
Okay, thank you very much, Dionysios. Who wants to start the discussion? Okay. If nobody wants, I'll. Oh, Christos. Okay, please.
It's not a sort of a discussion, rather a clarification. Dionysios, thank you very much. At some point during your presentation, you say that in Aristotle, we find this distinction between potentiality and actuality. Could you please help me? What exactly in Aristotle, which book do you have in mind?
In the metaphysics, this is a preponderant subject in the metaphysics, metaphysica.
And would you say that this is exclusively Aristotelian, or do we also find it in Platonic texts?
We find it in Neoplatonic texts because Neoplatonists perform a synthesis between Plato and Aristotle. So we do find it in Plotinus, in Proclus, in Iamblichus, in Porphyry, in most Neoplatonists. What one could say about Plato is that Plato has spoken about the relation of the matter with the ideas. So, in some sense, there is a forming of the matter by the ideas. But Aristotle has proceeded and has changed Plato's thought, because what happened with Aristotle is that, first of all, matter in Aristotle is more like Aristotle has depictions that resemble statues and the art of making statues. Whereas Plato had metaphors that were resembling more like projection. For Plato, matter is like a screen of projection of forms. It is non-existent in itself. Whereas for Aristotle, matter is something like a material that is shaped by the forms. And Plato has a positive view. Aristotle has a positive view that this shaping of matter by the forms is something that happens inside time, and it is a passage from potentiality to actualization. And of course, we can see that in the prime matter, if we spoke in metaphysical terms, this is the prime matter in metaphysical terms is pure potentiality. It can become anything. Whereas in the actual world, one does not have prime matter. One has a formed matter that can become something else. For example, marble is a formed matter, but it can become a statue. Then if the statue is destroyed, this destroyed statue can become, for example, a church. Or if Byzantines took the broken statue, they could make a church out of it. So we have all the time new forms. Aristotle sees this as a passage between the potentialities of matter and the actualizations, but except from prime matter, in all other beings, we have a formed matter that can become something else. Usually, for Aristotle, it is important to see how something becomes another things thanks to an inherent teleology. For example, the seed becomes a plant, the embryo becomes an adolescent and an adult, but this is a teleology inherent in this being, and this is why we speak of entelechia. For the Christians, for the Christian fathers, this was very important because it means a valorization of the future. It means that truth does not lie in the past, but truth lies in the future. So the Aristotelian teleology was something that was considered as very fertile for a Christian thinker. And on the other hand, they were critical about Aristotle because Aristotle has excluded the providence about individuals. Aristotle thought that the providence is exerted only in the universal. There's a divine providence for humanity, but not for persons. So the Christians were critical about him in this respect. Secondly, they were critical about Aristotle because Aristotle thought that the world was eternal, so it did not have a beginning. And this was also so he made the world an absolute principle. Thirdly, he had a notion of God that was too narcissistic. He thought that God only thinks himself and not what is below him. So this was also a third point of critique. And fourthly, he did not have in his psychology, he did not have a notion of the soul as something self-subsistent, and he did not have a notion of personhood. So for these reasons, Christians were critical to Aristotle, but in some points, they preferred Plato. But I think that Aristotle's insistence on teleology is something that was inherited by the Christians. What is very important is that the Christians have turned this teleology into eschatology. The difference between teleology and eschatology is that in teleology we have an inherent dynamic in nature. So an Aristotelian salvation would be too naturalistic. It would be like maturity, as we said yesterday, but maturity in a naturalistic sense. Maturity as a bringing forth of potentiality that are inherent in nature. Whereas in the Christian paradigm, this progress happens in dialogue with God, and it can also mean the frustration, the rejection or the failure of some natural potentialities through ascesis, through the crucifixion, etc. So St. Maximus has added two more terms, which are after the actualization, which is the Aristotelian ideal of teleology. He has added argia and stasis, namely, argia could be translated as inoperativity. This is a translation by Giorgio Agamben. It means inoperativity means like the Jewish Sabbath, an offering to God in which nature rests, and stasis means the finding of one's meaning, but this finding of one's meaning does not coincide with the actualization with energia. It is an eschatological event. Sorry for speaking too long.
Thank you very much. That clarified things. Thank you.
Yes, thank you very much, Dionysios. A very full answer. And now I see there are other people who have questions. I think Zurab has a question, and then I'll go to Paul, who also wants to ask you a couple of questions. Zurab, please.
Thank you. Thank you, Dionysios, for very interesting presentation. And I found very especially interesting this your discussion about the relationship between active side of humanity and passive side in deification. So you said that when human being reaches a peak of its activity during this deification, but it coincides to passivity at the same time. Currently, I'm working on Origen, and he uses many times he draws on Paul's Galatians 2:20, where Paul says that it's no longer I who live, but Christ who lives in me. And Origen, Origen has also something like a similar scheme, so to speak. On the one hand, it's not me anymore, no human being, but it's Christ in me, it's Logos incarnated in me. But at the same time, precisely this is the realization of humanity when Christ is born in me. So I'm wondering whether I understood that it's very complicated. It's not so easy to conceptualize how these both sides coincide with each other, but maybe could you elaborate a little bit on it? I know it's maybe some kind of hypothesis. How is it possible? What kind of logic can we find in your case, in Maximus, for example?
Thank you very much for the question. First of all, I would like to say that St. Maximus reacts to the Origenism of his own time, of the 6th and 7th century. Right now, specialists have a re-evaluation of Origen, and many patrologists like Father Andrew, also Father John Baer, have pointed to the positive element of Origen. So when I said that St. Maximus corrects, he rather corrects the Origenism of his own age. And secondly, on the other hand, he's influenced by Origen and Origenism. So indeed, it is a complicated issue. How we could see that St. Maximus has the notion of the logoi. This existed before him from Philo of Alexandria and in the Patristic Clement, in the Areopagitic writings, etc. And the notion of the logoi means that God has wills for nature. And these wills are dynamical inside history because it is not the initial state of nature inside history, and not, of course, the fallen mode of nature. It is a will of God for nature, and as the logoi are incorporated in Christ, one could say that the logos is how the nature is incorporated in Christ. For example, to take some examples, if, for example, nature has a will for life, this might remind even of Schopenhauer or Nietzsche, a will for life. In Christ, this will for life is not survival, but it is surrender to the will of the Father and life through the crucifixion. So this is how nature is actualized in its manifestation in a way that responds to the thirst of nature, to the will of nature, but at the same time the mode is supernatural. St. Maximus has reformulated the Evagrian aretology, bringing a lot of examples. For example, the prayer is a virtue that is a supernatural modification of the natural capacity of the intellect. Or, for example, love is a supernatural modification of the natural capacity of the irascible part of the soul. divine eros is the supernatural manifestation and modification of the natural capacity for desiring, etc. So this means that the passive element coincides with the active element in the sense that when we suffer divinization, we suffer it because we don't have the natural capacity for it. At the same time, this passion of divinization modifies our nature in a way that responds to the needs and to the wishes and the hunger and the thirst of our nature. For example, divine eros is supernatural, but it responds to the desiring character of human nature. Love responds to the sentimental character of our nature. Whereas Plato spoke about honor and pride, etc., and courage, the fathers speak about love that responds to this. It is in this sense that we have both passion and actualization at the same time.
Dionysios, thank you very much again. And I'm going to move now to Paul. I know he also has 2 questions to ask you.
Yes, thank you very much, Dr. Skliris, for your presentation. Yeah, I also have a question about Aristoteles, but perhaps I would better begin with the other one. Should I pose them together or one after the other? Together. Okay. So you said in your presentation, which I listened to, that the notion of epectasis is linked to the one of apokatastasis. I don't know how to pronounce it in English. Apokatastasis. So, would you please remind the others and inform me in what this link consists more exactly, together with a central reference, perhaps?
Yes. As you know, Saint Gregory is considered as having a theory that all will be saved in the end. And this notion that all will be saved is termed apokatastasis, which also means rehabilitation. So Saint Gregory has a meaning, he has a theory of nature, that nature, the initial plan of God for nature was a plan for a perfect nature. This plan was distorted because of the fall, so there was a second, let's say, something like a second creation, what Maximus will later call the fallen mode of creation. But in the eschatological condition, we will have the rehabilitation and apokatastasis of the initial plan of God for the first creation, and the second creation will open again in order to have the truth of the first creation. This is linked to the epectasis because in the following sense, as I said, the epectasis is the result of the encounter between the finite and the infinite. So we have a perpetual movement toward God and a perpetual progress in perfection. This means for St. Gregory that evil cannot withstand and cannot be eternal because evil is non-existent, and evil is something that can have a parasitical subsistence only in finite beings. But as the finite beings approach God more and more, evil is left behind because there cannot be a dualistic, manichaeistic coexistence of evil and God in the eschatological condition. because the evil has a false parasitical subsistence that can only become a temporary reality as long as we are finite. If in this theological condition we turn and we move toward the infinite God, our perpetual progress toward God means that the evil will eventually be exhausted. There will be an exhaustion of evil. So there will not be a permanent hell. But if someone is very sinful, he will have there will be some pedagogical modes according to which in the afterlife he may need more time to be purified, but eventually there will be an exhaustion of evil. This was let's say an optimistic stance of St. Gregory about the exhaustion of evil. St. Maximus has tried to correct it and he has formulated a very complex theory in which in St. Maximus. So, in order to answer to your question, this is how the epectasis, the meaning of the dynamical perpetual movement, is linked to the apokatastasis, the rehabilitation, because the epectasis. Yes, you understood.
Thank you. And the reference, if you can, please.
This is in the dialogue with Macrina, and also we find it on the Περικαρασκευής ανθρώπου, on the making of man, which is a continuation of Saint Basil. Περικαρασκευής ανθρώπου, on the building, on the construction, on the creation of man. You can read this, and also the dialogue with Macrina is a sort of Christian Phaedo.
Yes,
Macrina in her dying bed.
Thank you very much.
She speaks about the immortality of the souls and Gregory.
Yes,
St. Maximus speaks about a rehabilitation of nature, so then the nature which is the common and universal nature is rehabilitated and saved, but the difference between the saved ones and the damned ones is that the damned ones have a mode of disposition towards their saved nature, which is a mode of it is a mode of not receiving, so to speak, the grace of the salvation of nature. So it is, hell is like a mode of, as St. Maximus says, a mode of external knowledge without participation, epignosis anef methexeos. The damned ones perceive externally the salvation of nature, but they cannot participate in it because they have a different personal mode of participating in this nature, which is a mode of non-participation in salvation.
Yes, thank you. So the other question is about Aristoteles. Could you please point out where in the work of Aristoteles does the philosopher talk about divinization generally and about the conditioning of the coordination with God, as you say, by the loss of personal distinctiveness?
Yes.
In the Anima, for example, he speaks not about such a coordination, but about the active intellect, which is not to be conflated with God, which actualizes our intellect, which does not survive death. His evasiveness from the Anima led to very different theories put forward by Alexander of Aphrodisias, by Themistius, Averroes, and Thomas Aquinas.
I agree with you. Aristotle does not speak about theosis, about divinization. What I had in mind is the active intellect, which comes from the outside, and the active intellect is a sort of divine element in us. So in this sense, we do not have divinization. What we have is a divine element inside us, but this divine element is not is not personal. It is not our person. It is not, and it is not. It is not if what is divine is above and purified from both from the body, as our friend has spoken in the last paper. We don't have this notion of bodily divinization in Aristotle as we have it in the Christians, and also from the lower part of the soul. So as you said, we find it in the anima, and of course, but also in the metaphysics. One should read the anima together with the metaphysics. Metaphysic L, for example. And as you said, also in the Neoplatonists, like in the first of all in Alexander of Prodisias, and then in the Neoplatonists, we have a sort of different. When we reach Plotinus, we have the haploses, the making oneself simple. So one could arguably say that when we reach Plotinus, we do have a theory of divinization through both Plato and Aristotle. So Plotinus brings Aristotle through Alexander of Prodisias to a theory of divinization, which does not exist in Aristotle himself. What in Aristotle was only a divine element in scientas, in Plotinus it becomes a chance for us to become divine. So we do have theosis in Plotinus. Some thinkers think that this is also a Christian influence.
Thank you very much, Dionysios. I think we should end here our questions just to start with the next speaker.
Yes, thank you.
And thank you very much for your presentation and for answering, as I said, giving such full answers to all the questions people asked. I think that's really important. Now I'm gonna hand the chair of moderator to Paul, and I know here that the next person who is going to present is Dr. Johannes Pulkannen with his comparative study of deification in Saint Symeon, Saint John of the Cross, and Saint Maximus. Paul, if you want to introduce Dr. Pulkannen.
Yes, thank you. So the theme of life through sacrifice continues, and the link is Saint Maxim Confessor. So, and our next speaker is Dr. Johannes Pulkannen, born 64. He grew up on the west coast of Finland. He has studied Russian and Russian literature in Kiev and St. Petersburg, and theology in Uppsala, where he also resides together with his wife Cecilia and their 3 almost grown-up children. The current presentation leans on his 2009 doctoral dissertation, as Petre said, from Uppsala University, The Dark Night, St. John of the Cross and Eastern Orthodox Theology. After a career in teaching and also CEO for a traveling agency specialized on pilgrimages, he is currently preparing for priesthood within the Orthodox Church of Sweden. Dr. Johannes Pulkannen, welcome.
Thank you. Thank you for the presentation. It was a traveling agency for pilgrimages.
Pilgrimages, thank you.
Yes, and for natural reasons, there hasn't been a market for pilgrimages lately. Although I myself succeeded in doing a little pilgrimage to Greece in October. I'm a bit kind of nervous on this because I actually jumping back to a topic that I haven't really been working with since my dissertation, and Olga spoke me into it, and I'm grateful to that. I was almost about to give up because I'm not used to. I've been lately doing very different kind of things, but in any case, I will try to summarize. And I'm studying this paper by pointing out that when we speak about deification, there are two patterns. We speak about deification by purification, enlightenment, and then as deification, the threefold way that comes mostly from the ascetic monastic theology. But we also speak about deification through the Eucharist itself, and in this paper I'm quoting St. Gregory of Nyssa, conceding, and now I quote, "He disseminates himself in every believer through that flesh whose substance comes from bread and wine, blending himself with the bodies of believers to secure that by this union with the immortal humankind too may be a sharer in incorruption." So I'm pointing out that when we look at deification, we could have the possibility to looking simultaneously at the teaching of the threefold way, how any theologian teaches on the threefold way of purification and enlightenment and deification, but also how they teach about Eucharist. And this is something that I actually did not do in my dissertation. So I'm doing it here in brief. Then very briefly speaking, I'm finding that both Saint Maximus the Confessor and Saint Symeon the new theologian teach about the deification in using very similar terms. It's most likely Saint Symeon was perhaps well read in Saint Maximus the Confessor. I will quote briefly how Saint Symeon approaches deification, and now I quote Saint Symeon. "What is the purpose of the incarnation of the divine Logos, which is proclaimed throughout the scriptures, about which we read and which yet we do not recognize? Surely it is that he has shared in what is ours, so as to make us participants of what is his. For the Son of God became Son of Man in order to make us human beings sons of God, raising us up by grace to what he is by nature, giving us a new birth in the Holy Spirit and leading us directly into the kingdom of heaven." And even what comes to terminology, Saint Maximus the Confessor and Saint Symeon the theologian are very much in line with each other. Both also emphasize the cutting off of one's own will. What comes to the ascetic spiritual struggle, it's a struggle of the will. In this, and I quote very briefly Saint Symeon, "If through the fear of God you cut off your own will inexplicably, for you do not know how this happens, God will give you his will. You will keep it indelibly in your heart, opening the eyes of your mind so that you recognize it, and you will be given the strength to fulfill it. The grace of the Holy Spirit operates these things. Without it, nothing is accomplished." And then maybe it comes to many of us as a surprise that actually St. John of the Cross, the Roman Catholic saint, St. John of the Cross, doctor of the church, actually teaches both deification and cutting off of one's will. And I will actually share my screen here because it's a bit different wording. Let me see if I can find, I opened, there it is. And now I should be able to share my screen here. Application window, Chrome tab. There it is. Share. So, St. John of the Cross. Can you see me now? And maybe you, moderator, can talk to me because I need to hear a voice.
Yes, we see it. Yes, thank you.
Yes, here. St. John of the Cross. "Nor is it to be thought possible that the soul should be capable of so great a thing as that it should breathe in God as God in it, in the way of participation. The italics are mine, as you can guess. For granting that God has bestowed upon it so great a favor as to unite it with the most holy Trinity, whereby it becomes like God. And he's using the word deiform, and God by participation. Is it altogether incredible that it should exercise the faculties of its understanding, perform its acts of knowledge and of love, or to speak more accurately, should have it all done in the Holy Trinity together with it, as the Holy Trinity itself? This, however, takes place by communication and participation, God himself effecting it in the soul, for this is to be transformed in the three persons in power, wisdom, and love. And herein it is but the soul becomes like God, semejante, who, that it might come to this, created it to his own image and likeness. So here you see St. John of the Cross teaching deification. It's a rare mention, actually. He doesn't speak in these terms, only in a couple of places. And here a second from the same chapter from the Canticle. St. John of the Cross, accordingly, soul possesses the same goods by participation that the son possesses by nature. As a result, they are truly gods by participations, Theosis or participation, equals and companions of God. Wherefore St. Peter said, may grace and peace be accomplished and perfect in you in the knowledge of God and of our Lord Jesus Christ, as all things of his divine power that pertain to life and piety are given to us through the knowledge of him. And this is a quotation from the second epistle of St. Peter, as you see. So, and then he also teaches about the will, saying the entire matter, this is about the ascetic struggle of the threefold way. The entire matter of reaching the union with God consists in purging the will of its appetites and emotions so that from a human and lowly will it may be changed into the divine will, made identical with the will of God. So I will try to find back to the seminar and end this sharing mode and then open up the window again. Let me see. I assume you are seeing me, although I'm not seeing the full picture of you. So now I will say that. Okay, in any case. So this is there is this general similarity. Basically, they are teaching the same thing. But when we go into details about St. John of the Cross terminology, and I will simply, and there are some other questions that I also wanted to lift up, and I will simply read my concluding remarks, because there are the questions that I want to open up for discussion and for your comments. The quotations and the remarks above suggest that the three above mentioned saints and theologians share related beliefs as regards deification itself, giving the transformation of the human will a key role in the preceding necessary purification from passions and appetites. Yet the material also suggests intriguing differences that could open up for further study. One of them concerns the seemingly more optimistic view of Saint Symeon as regards the possibility of experiencing deification here and now, even the very act of receiving the Eucharist. And this, I did not summarize it here in this short summary, but I had some of the epistemology of Saint Symeon. I let it surface from my dissertation because I really consider him as a great theologian. In comparison with him, St. Maximus appears as more restrained, not to even mention St. John of the Cross, who even seems to equate sensory with sinful. And this is in line with our earlier discussions. I allowed some of St. Symeon's spiritual epistemology to surface because of my general impression that this is indeed the case. I'm repeating myself here. One possible way to interpret St. John's equation of sensory with sinful is simply to ignore it and to refer the whole matter to repentance and change of will, according to the already quoted saying that the entire matter of reaching the union with God consists in purging the will of its appetites and emotions. Yet, considering the other philosophical maxims and principles St. John frequently refers to, such as his current emphasis on the general non-proportionality between God and created things, his corresponding emphasis on God as being completely without a mode, and as such the cause of the dark nights of the soul and the spirit, the matter might not be as simple. Although St. John also admits that the ultimate cause of experiencing these dark nights is impurity by sin, the terminology he employs when describing the soul itself and its ability to know God constantly equates sensory with sinful and spiritual and pure with what is beyond senses. Consequently, he views everything even remotely sensory in spiritual life as problematic, at least before the soul's final purification and annihilation in the dark night of the spirit is accomplished. This dichotomous fixation with senses as a spiritual problem could also be the reason why St. John does not seem to find a way to relate the Eucharist to the rest of his theology, which is, as customary in all ascetic theology, somewhat more focused on ascending Mount Carmel than actually pitching tents on its top. Theologically speaking, the big question is about what to do with the basic Platonic dichotomy between spirit and materia after the incarnation. At least St. Symeon, the new theologian, seems to suggest that after the incarnation, the real issue here and now is only about purity and change of will with the help of the grace of the Holy Spirit. And here I want to just add the last thing, that this speaking about God as a mode, approaching to me as a mode that I cannot cope with, is there really a place for, in this manner of speaking of a God as a mode and as a totally different kind of mode? Is it not more that God after the incarnation comes to us in a personal way, showing us my personal faults, helping me to get rid of my personal faults? He has become incarnate, he has become a person, and he knows about how we are. He doesn't really come to us as some kind of impersonal mode. This is my last point, and I'm kind of summarizing my own dissertation here from many years ago.
So thank you very much, Dr. Johannes, and I think we all wish you to become the next Thunberg. I'm not counting Greta, of course. And I'll give the floor to our guests for their questions, please. Yes, please, John. Dr. Skliris.
I would like to ask you if in St. John of the Cross we can find something like a salvation of desire, a salvation of the irascible and the desiring part of the soul. This occupies my thought because in the comparison between St. Gregory of Nyssa and St. Maximus the Confessor, St. Gregory of Nyssa thinks that we should be purified from anger and desire, whereas St. Maximus tries to see a way of transforming anger and desire into love and a desire for God, an erotic element for God. So I would like to ask you if in St. John of the Cross, the desiring part of the soul is seen as something to be purified from, or as something that can be transformed in the divinization.
So, do you hear me now? Yes. I think St. John of the Cross can be read in an orthodox way if we ignore his scholastic mix of Platonism and Aristotelism. I think you forgot to mention or did even think that the scholastic theology is also one of these mixes of both Platonic and Aristotelian influences, and he kind of you can find in him, as I demonstrated, a similar terminology, the simpler terminology, but since he all the time keeps the philosophical axioms present, he doesn't really find a way of speaking of in a positive way of the different parts of this, how to say, he doesn't use the terminology of the irascible part and the desires. He speaks instead of the three faculties, will and memory and the intellect. And that's a different terminology, more related to St. Augustine. And the whole point of the infused contemplation is that the transformation of these three faculties, and they are to be more or less annihilated until something new can resurrect, and he doesn't have how to say that he doesn't really find a way to emphasize how this is an image of God, and if it to the degree it is an image of God, and he has that language also, it is something in the soul. It doesn't really touch the body, at least until one is totally purified. The soul is a likeness, but not but in these terms, not in the terms you are referring to. Did I answer your question?
Okay, if we could go to our last question. I think Father Stephen Hadley raised his hand. I don't know if he's there now. Yes, thank you. Yes, please, Father Hadley. Could you please?
I apologize. I did not have a question to ask.
Oh, okay.
Excuse me.
Sorry. So, anybody else for a last question, please? Yeah. Well, yes. Okay, doctors.
If there is no other to ask a question,
go ahead, please. Yes.
Thank you. Saint John of the Cross is in the context of contra-reformation against the Reformation, and I would like to ask if in this context he revives Augustine of Hippo in some sense. You told us that he has some elements of the Augustinian psychology with the memory and the intellect. Does this take place in the context of the struggle with Reformation, or no?
Not really, not consciously. It's the Saint Teresa of Avila who is kind of more aware of what is going on in the society, and he's very worried about the Lutheran influences that she doesn't actually. She is very worried about the Lutheran influences that she doesn't really know much about. Saint John of the Cross, not really. The society of his time almost doesn't surface in his writings. He's totally focused on, how to say, completing his oral teaching with these writings. So the nuns, and they were asking him to complete this, to put it in writing. So he's very much the theologian of the threefold way to God, and solely that. And I have a question to you. Since many of you are well versed in St. Maximus the Confessor, I was thinking about how positive, because I'm kind of, my impression is that there are some traces of Platonic influences. So there is more Platonically influenced than St. Symeon, the new theologian. He's more keen to separating or keeping the distinction between symbol and reality, it's more important to him than to Saint Symeon, the new theologian. And I don't know what is your general impression on that. I don't know if any one of you have been working with both Symeon, the new theologian, and St. Maximus and Confessor simultaneously.
Yes, well, I guess we have 2 or 3 minutes for this. Else, if ideas don't come up now, you could surely exchange your opinions via email. But if somebody wants to react to Dr. Pulkannen's last question, so please do shortly. So if not, unfortunately, our 30 minutes allocated have now expired, and we'll go to our next presenter. So in the following, I will give the floor to Christos Veskoukis, who has studied Orthodox theology in Athens, his home city. Then he earned a first master's degree in philosophy of religion from the United Kingdom, and a second master in theology from the public theology-focused theological department of Radboud University in the Netherlands. Now he is at the University of Exeter writing a PhD thesis about sin and freedom in St. John Chrysostom, Berdyaev, and von Balthasar. Dear Christos, welcome. I will give the floor to you now, please. And if you think you could make a short description, general description of your contribution, this would help out in having more time to available for the discussion. So please.
Wonderful. Thank you very much, Paul. And thanks to the organizers of this wonderful conference. So as you perhaps have seen already, the title of my presentation paper is Theosis according to Lossky and Berdyaev. And after this bit, it continues with the question, deification as rejection or embracement of Western secularity. So what I try to do in this paper is to examine a side of theosis which is not so explored or often explored. And this is that we often speak or praise the doctrine of theosis because it brings us closer to God. We experience theosis like the saints have already, experienced and will experience in the afterlife even further. But in this traditional doctrine, there is this overemphasis sometimes on the role of the church. It is through the church, in the church, that the acquisition of God's grace is acquired, and this leads us closer to theosis. But what I was thinking is that this is a very beautiful doctrine and an approach for the Orthodox audience. But what about the people outside the church? The danger that I see here is that if we approach theosis in such an overemphasized church-centeredness, then we might run the risk of sort of isolating ourselves from the secular, which we have a pastoral duty to call and engage with this secular, which is not orthodox, at least in a Western context. So what I do in my paper is that I divide it into two parts. The one I examine Lossky, which is a key representative of this understanding of theosis, which gives a lot of room to the church and priority to the church. I highlight the difficulties that this might have for a secular audience and for the engagement of orthodoxy with the Western secular milieu. And then I turn to Berdyaev, who is Orthodox philosopher on the margins of orthodoxy, but what he does and he offers us is that he introduces the notion of creativity to the process of theosis. So on the one hand, we have Lossky with his church certainties, and on the other hand, we have Berdyaev, which sees theosis as a creative process. And by creativity, Berdyaev means that we should engage creatively, but yet engage with the secular world. And what I propose as a conclusion is that a healthy Orthodox approach to theosis from a pastoral point of view is a combination of both Lossky's church-centeredness, but also Berdyaev's creativity. Because if we keep Lossky's understanding, then of course we stay with a focus on the church, which of course should be continued. We are Orthodox at the end of the day. But then with Berdyaev, we can also add a creative aspect which might help us engage more with our secular Western environment. In broad lines, this is what I argued.
Yes, thank you. I would also have some questions for you. We already had an exchange via email, but perhaps I should give the floor now to the rest of our participants. And so please, if anybody has questions for Mr. Veskoukis, you can start. Yes, Viorel Koman, Dr. Koman.
Christos, thank you very much. Can you hear me?
I think he can, yes.
Oh yeah, thank you very much for your presentation. I think that Vladimir Lossky's views on theosis were very much influential upon the trajectory of modern Orthodoxy, especially in the second half of the 20th century. But when it comes to Berdyaev, I think that his views were not as influential as those of Lossky. Do you agree with this? And if so, what will be the explanation why Berdyaev is very much still neglected in Orthodox theology? Because if we look at Bulgakov, for instance, I think that there is a new Bulgakov moment in Orthodox theology, especially after 2000, 2005, when a lot of scholars both in the Orthodox Church but also outside Orthodoxy engage with Bulgakov's theology. But I think this is not the case with Berdyaev, and he still remains very much neglected by contemporary Orthodox theologians. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much for the question. Well, I certainly agree that Lossky is indeed influential, way more than Berdyaev nowadays. But I also think that there is an engagement, perhaps slow engagement if you wish, but there is with Berdyaev. For example, Dionysios Skliris recently published an article on 3 theologians. I think one of them was Berdyaev. Romilo Knežević did his PhD on Berdyaev and Ioannis in Oxford, like recently. He just published a book on Berdyaev, and I'm also doing my PhD on Berdyaev. So slowly, people start engaging more with Berdyaev, but there is certainly a problem that occurs when we examine Berdyaev's writings, because he might have been in the Orthodox world, but he drew inspiration from sources which were very much not so Orthodox. For example, Jacob Böhme, a Lutheran mystic.
But that was also the case with Bulgakov.
Yes, but not so much. I believe. This is how I see it, at least. And this creates a problem, because with Bulgakov, he tried to orthodoxify more than Berdyaev. Berdyaev also, his way of writing was bold, too bold sometimes. And here, a creative reapproachment and correctiveness to this, to how he writes, how he puts, would be essential, because what he puts or what he writes, I think, might be of help.
Okay, thank you very much.
Okay.
Yes, Dr. Yashi Zura.
Thank you, Dr. Veskoukis, for your presentation. That's a very interesting topic. So I was wondering whether, do you find any similarities between Berdyaev's understanding of creativity and as kind of, and then Karl Rahner's notion of anonym Christian? Can you find some parallels between, in order to make Christian doctrine of deification not confined to the church, but somehow bring it to relate to secular world? So Karl Rahner had also this Catholic theology and this notion of very controversial notion of anonym Christian. That's one question. And the second question, with regards to this combination of the church and the secular world in relation to this doctrine of deification, when you try to combine this, what should we do with the notion of the church in order to make it able to be accommodated to the secular notion? Maybe our problem is with the current notion of church, which is very rigid, very closed, and we need to little bit work on it in order to make it open to the secular world. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for 2 questions. Well, starting with what you said about Rahner and the concept of unknown Christians. I haven't studied Rahner to such an extent, so to really compare. From my limited knowledge of Rahner, I would say that yes, we could perhaps find similarities there. As for your second question, how can we open up the church? This has a danger in it, because while opening up, we might cease being a church. What I would like to see in the future, for example, is not a secularization of the church. We are Orthodox, certainly. What Berdyaev says is that he introduces this idea of creativity, and then later on, at some point, he speaks about churchification of the world. So the world is out there, separate from the church, and we have to imagine that there are 2 poles. The one is here and the one is here. And we have, as Christians, as Orthodox, we should engage with the world. And Berdyaev leaves this very open, because creativity lies in us. It depends on our unique talents. So there's not a sort of formula, you have to do this and this. First of all, you have to pray to get enlightened. That's the concept of the church is very useful, coming from Lossky. But then once you get enlightened by your contemplation with God, then you will also understand as a person what is your unique task, what is your unique way that you will use or can use to engage with the secular without losing your Orthodox identity. I don't know if this answers.
Yes, absolutely. But then, don't you find the problems within the church that when we are not too much, so to say, encouraging people to be creative, so to speak? For example, I have this problem in the Church of Georgia. So the creativity is something sometimes considered as dangerous and leading you astray from Orthodoxy and so on. Don't you see this problem in our church with itself?
I see that many people are afraid of creativity. That's very correct. I mean, it happens also in my church community. I mean, I very rarely hear of creativity in sermons. Yeah, okay. Yeah, it exists. It's a problem, I think. But as Berdyaev says, there is an evil creativity and there's also a Christ-like creativity. And if we have been made in the image of the Creator, God, then creativity, I don't see a reason why creativity should be something evil.
Of course not.
God, at the end of the day, was and is a creator of everything.
Yes, if I can intervene there, well, one certain difference is the creatio ex nihilo. But you were saying that you wouldn't advocate, of course, the secularization of the church. In the same time, to quote you, you say things like, the church opening itself and embracing Western secularism is like Christ opened himself and embraced humanity. So there are some problematical formulation which you may want to take another look on. If I may put on a question of my own, you know, if classical modernity only cared about freedom and totalitarian modernity only cared about equality, postmodernism radicalizes, I think, both concepts, promoting anarchy and anti-elitism as today, if you look around. So love without truth, truth with a capital T, morphs into hate of truth. And the postmodern individualism, tolerance, so-called, and liberalism can be shown as symptoms. So which are those values you referred to which are good, even if not good in the name of Christ?
Well, thank you very much. And especially for the first point we also discussed in our private correspondence through email. Well, indeed, I say that the church has to sort of embrace the secular, but there's a useful distinction to bear in mind. When I speak of embracement, I don't necessarily speak of agreement or acceptance.
This is paradoxical, I think.
Well, if we think about it, like what the word really means, if I embrace you, let's assume that here we are not on the internet, so we are face to face, and I will embrace you, which means my body will embrace your body, physically speaking. But that does not necessarily mean that my mind will agree with everything that you think or you do when we are not embraced. So I don't think that this is paradoxical. Different to embrace and different to accept.
Isn't this external? Isn't it just a, you know, an external thing?
It is indeed. And I think that would be a first step. Because as it is nowadays, we don't even have this external. Because when you see the other, the secular, the homosexual, if you wish, and sort of other categories which are really taboo in our church, and we just turn our head, then there's not even this external engagement. We have to start somewhere. And with this, I do not mean that we should become postmodernists straight away. No, not at all. And indeed, there's a danger there in postmodernism, as you beautifully put it, you know, this postmodern conception might lead to against truth, in the name of truth, as you put it. But the postmodernism is there because it has been created by humans, and humans have been created by God. They bear the image of God. So if we really care about the Imago Dei, the creation of God, which is humans also, then I don't see any reason of not engaging with what humans create. For example, postmodernism.
I think they create, or at least participate in, both good and evil. But I think we can pass to another question if you would like, the other participants. Yes, Dr. Skliris, sorry.
Thank you very much. I enjoyed your paper a lot. I would like to ask you, you have mentioned the work by Romilo Knežević, and he focuses on the notion of Urgrund, which we find in Schelling, and it is derived probably from Deme, as you mentioned. So this is a notion of Berdyaev about creativity as related to a moment of internal creativity in God himself. This notion of the Urgrund, meaning, let's say, the original ground, the original background, is somehow problematic from the point of view of Orthodox theology, because it is something like a presupposition to the three persons, whereas Lossky had used the notion of hyperousion, above essence, speaking about a nature or essence of God, which is not essence and nature properly speaking, but in reality it is a super essence. It is a supra-substantial essence or substance. And I would like to ask you if you think that these two notions of Lossky and Berdyaev could be synthesized if we could solve problems of the Urgrund position of Berdyaev through a new interpretation of a new insistence on the hyperousion of Lossky as a way to formulate the divine creativity, divine anti-essentialism, divine source of creativity. And in this sense, I don't know if we could see divinization as a participation by grace to this supra-substantial character of God. As Father Andrew said yesterday, there is arguably a sort of, in St. Maximus, a sort of divinization as becoming infinite or even without beginning. Maybe could we say in the same sense that divinization is creativity in the sense of partaking by grace to the supra-substantial character of God? And the second question is if creativity could enter our ecclesiology, if we could have an ecclesiological creativity or creative ecclesiology.
Thank you. Beautiful questions, both of them. I'll start with the second because I think it's the easiest. Certainly, we can say creativity from a church point of view. That's why Berdyaev himself, in his article Salvation and Creativity, if I'm not mistaken, speaks about the churchification. So always the starting point is the church. This is where we begin. We get inspired. We communicate through the mysteries with God, and then we go on churchificating, as Berdyaev puts it, the world. So certainly there is a link between creativity and ecclesiology. As for what you said about the Urgrund and hyperousion of Lossky, well, I would like to have more details because, as Paul said, I'm doing a PhD now on Berdyaev. So these are interesting questions that I try to find an answer. And certainly I would be open to see it, to see Urgrund in light of hyperousion. Because we have to make Berdyaev speak to Orthodox people. So in this way, to use Lossky, hyperousion, which is more Orthodox acceptable, that would be a good device. But can I have your views on this? How do you see seeing the Urgrund through the hyperousion? How this would work?
Yes, please, Dr. Skliris. This will be the last. You will close this this presentation that discusses.
I have written a book on Slavoj Žižek, who is influenced by Schelling, so and by Böhme and by Hegel, so he shares a sort of inspiration with Berdyaev. I think that Urgrund is a very fertile idea in view of human creativity. It has some problems from the point of view that it is something like a presupposition to the three persons. So it is something like posited before the three persons. So it so that the three persons become part of a process of dialectic. This is the problem from an Orthodox point of view. On the other hand, the Perusion, one could make the, we have two notions. We have on the one hand the notion of hyperusion, above substance, and on the other hand the notion of homoousion, same substance. Father Ludovicos, for example, has tried to reformulate patristic theology based on the notion of the homoousion. If we could synthesize between the two notions, the homoousion and the hyperusion, maybe one could speak about an homohyperusion. In this sense, the three persons share a nature, an essence that is, let's say, above nature. It's not a, it is a dynamic and infinite nature. So it is a nature that is always creative. This element is absolutely patristic. In Saint Maximus the Confessor, for example, it is stated explicitly that to speak about essence and substance in God is abusive. We speak only abusively of a substance. In reality, it is a super substance. So this is a traditional element, and this can point to a way of seeing creativity in God as Berdyaev would wish, but without making this a presupposition before the persons. This is rather something that the persons share between them. I think this could lead to an orthodox version of anti-essentialism, which is postmodern in a positive sense. It's not postmodern in a relativist sense, but in a positive sense.
Yeah, that's wonderful suggestion. I wrote it down. Thank you very much for this.
Thank you for.
Yes, and thank you to both of you and to the rest of the contributors. I would like to turn now to our next speaker, to Dr. Ioann Dura. Welcome. Having a special interest in history of religion, he is a lecturer with a focus on India. He's a lecturer at the University of Constanța, Ovidius, editor of many international journals, organizer of tens of conferences with a large array of publications, and visiting professor in Lebanon, Slovakia, Russia, and Vietnam. Dr. Ioann Dura, welcome. If you would also like to, actually, I think your presentation wasn't available, so we give the floor now for this. Thank you.
Yes, thank you very much, Paul. First of all, I want to send my greetings for the professors, researchers, scholars, and the participants, and also organizers of this third International Theological Conference. I'm very glad to take part in this event. That looks it becomes a tradition of the Orthodox Research Group of St. John Chrysostomos. For this, I want to express my appreciation, real appreciations for Olga Sevastianova, because her academic engagement and energy have brought us together, giving us the opportunity to reflect, to express our own ideas on the theological core of Christianity, Christian spirituality, namely deification, Theosis. Second, I apologize for not having time to send my presentation before the conference, so that it could have been consulted. My health condition after 2 weeks in hospital don't allow me this. So if you allow me, I will share my presentation with you now, because I use some technical concept, and I hope I will not stress you very much. Okay.
Yes, please do. Proceed.
Yes, thank you. How can I share my presentation, my PowerPoint presentation? If you...
Unfortunately, I'm not very familiar with the platform. I don't know exactly. Maybe Peter, maybe Petre could help you. I don't know exactly.
Yeah.
Petre, if you want to give
some advices, it will be nice for me.
I will shut down my microphone.
Now see my presentation, or?
Yes, it's visible now. Yes.
Okay, that's great. Okay. Thank you very much. So, the title of my presentation is On Spiritual Path, Understanding Theosis Through the Language of Mystical Experience, a Comparative Perspective. Why I choose this topic? Because my presentation intends to highlight in a comparative theological perspective between Christianity and Hinduism, more precisely Advaita Vedanta school, the definition of existential becoming of spiritual perfections. I ask myself some questions. Is theosis a mystical experience and it is Brahmanubhava? How and why we need to understand in a constructive method the spiritual path of the other? And what is the relevance of theosis for our post-modern world when dogmatics is subject to deconstruction? Have you ever wondered how non-Christians read our scripture theology hermeneutics? How do we read theirs beyond the cultural hiatus between West and East? And when I say East, I refer at the Asian part of the world. Beyond the radical theological and philosophical differences, we understand them and they understand us, in fact. It should be noted that we are conditioned by the specific social, cultural, and religious identity in which we grow up and by the language in which we think. And Western and Eastern world think differently, but we use some same terms, concepts in describing these two versions of mystical experiences: unity, duality, becoming, knowledge, and etc. In fact, the rhythm of the daily life is put under materialistic and secular pressure, so that the human horizon, is determined by skepticism and anxiety due to the multiple violation to which dignity of human person is subjected. This psychological condition represents a challenge, but also an opportunity, namely to reconsider spirituality as a way to find ourselves. Precisely for these reasons, the major religious traditions of the world are under the sign of the spiritual exercise of defining interiority. Religious spirituality in its historical application is a search of the self, of existential meaning, of authenticity. In Christianity, we know that this search is the self in ourself has a historical dimension. We discover our true identity in communion with God in the horizon of divine grace. And our spiritual becoming is an intentional exercise of will and freedom centered in Jesus Christ, the path, the truth, and the life. So, my first part of my presentation is East and West methodological precautions in comparative analysis. Any comparative theological analysis implies a double intention, highlighting the differences of the different perspectives and arguing the possible similarities. In the study of Oriental religions from a Western Christian side, one of the major errors is to translate and to explore elements of doctrine from Hinduism, Buddhism, Taoism, Confucianism, and so on, through the optics of the terms and categories of Western philosophical religious thought. And I quote here from Rengueno, and all references are at the end of my presentation. The major error of these scholars is to see everything from a Western point of view and through their own mentality, while the first condition to be able to interpret a doctrine correctly is to make the effort to assimilate it and to situate ourselves as far as possible in the point of view of those who conceived it. This lack of the interpretation element of Hindu doctrine by Western scholars is also verified in the inaccuracy of the translation into Western languages of Hindu scriptures. Sanskrit terms are translated through corresponding terms from Western languages, but in reality they are untranslatable because they express a different way of understanding divinity, ultimate reality, man, and so on. In this regard, it is pointed out, it is not enough to know a language grammatically, nor to make a correct word-for-word translation, to enter in the spirit of that language and to assimilate the thinking of those who speak it. There is no true equivalence between the terms of two different languages. And I share with you some errors in this translation. For example, the self, Atman, is translated by the soul. But in Hinduism, there is a completely different anthropological structure. Man is not a person as Christians understand the person, consisting of body and soul. He is Jivatman, an individual self in this illusory reality, whose structure assumes the real self Atman, over which are superimposed three bodies, physical, subtle, and causal. In this sense, even the Western word reincarnation, that is very used today, that is a translation of Sanskrit samsara, is very wrong. Others try to put to understand soteria as equivalent for moksha, but moksha is the liberation from the circuit of transition of that man from one existence to another one. God is not equivalent to Brahman, the ultimate reality in Hinduism. And according to Hindu doctrines, not me, Ioann, Dura, will achieve moksha because I'm just a phenomenal existence in this life, superimposed on the real self, Atman. As I mentioned before, I will refer to a comparative perspective between Orthodox Christianity and Advaita Vedanta. In fact, Hinduism is a complex of 6 philosophical schools: Nyaya, Vishaya, Vaisheshika, Samkhya, Yoga, Mimamsa, and Vedanta. And among these, the most widely accepted is Vedanta, and Advaita Vedanta is a part of Vedanta, is the religious and philosophical system that proposes non-duality as a fundamental metaphysical principle. Advaita means non-duality, and I put here some main ideas of this system. As you can see, the ultimate reality is Brahman and Nirguna, reality ekam eva advitiyam, that means one without the second. This ultimate reality is not relational one with the world, because the world, the universe in Advaita Vedanta, in Vedanta, is just an illusion, Maya, caused by ignorance, by vidya. Non-dual knowledge, jnana or vidya, is the primus of the mystical experience, Brahmanubhava. In this part of my presentation, mystical experience in different definition and in different religious version, I try to highlight the different perspective on the mystical experience. I used here the definition of Gerald Larsson regarding the mystical experience. So I quote, mystical experience is an intuitive understanding and realization of the meaning of existence. An intuitive understanding and realization that is intense, integrative, self-authenticating, and liberating. Can we speak of varieties of mystical experience that give rise to a variety of symbolic expressions, or is there only one form of mystical experience and a variety of ways of interpreting it? This difficulty lies in the fact that the descriptions given to mystical experience differ in the ways in which the cultural and the religious context is relevant. we speak of deification or communion with God in Christianity, achievement of union with one in all Platonism, attainment of nirvana in Buddhism, realization of identity between Atman, Brahman in Hinduism. In response to this problem of the diversity of mystical experience, Bernard McGuinn points out that mystical experience is culturally determined. Zachner and Rudolf Otto opposed the view that all mystical experiences are essentially the same. Methodological, we can classify the variety of mystical experience in the following pattern. Radhakrishna states that there is only one religious experience, namely the mystical one. Zachner mentioned 3 varieties of mystical experience: Pan-Enhenic, all in one, monistic one, theistic God. Pan-Enhenic in mysticism correspond to the natural mysticism, monistic mysticism in Advaita Vedanta and Samkhya Yoga, and theistic mysticism is identified in Christianity. The monistic mystical experience has the particularity of the fact that it is described in negative terms, against the contrary to everything we know in a positive sense. The most radical model in this regard is the Buddhist Shunyata. Chuang Tzu paradoxically characterizes this experience as the experience of the non-something, the non-nothing Tao. In Advaita, this experience is the identity with one Brahman. In the opinion of Sneha Smart, we must distinguish between the experience of the numinous and the mystical experience. The experience of the numinous implies a feeling of the presence of the other, seen as outside a feeling of power, mystery, and fascination. For example, a feeling of a person. Mystical experience may include some of these elements in certain situations, but in reality, it does not need them in the particular profile. States divide mystical experiences into 2 types, extroverted and introverted. During the extroverted experience, the mystic is aware of what is externally given to him. All things take on a certain divine quality. During the introverted experience, the mystic loses contact with everything around him, being absorbed in his own mind. For Rudolf Otto, both theistic experience and 2 varieties of mystical experience, inner path and outer path, are classified according to those general categories of numinous experience. All religions involves and are based on the experience of the numinous, which gives a positive knowledge of the central object of a religion, God or the supreme divinity. He defines the numinous experience in terms of the 4 moments or type of experience: mysterium, tremendum, fascinas, and augustum. Dan Browning states that mystical experience can be divided into 2 general types: unifying mysticism and the mysticism of vacuum or emptiness. Robert Foreman displays a 3-fold classification of apophatic mysticism. First one, the event of pure consciousness as an awake experience but without content, in which one does not even think, perceive, acting. Second, dualistic mystical state, characterized by phenomenological dualism and increased consciousness of self-awareness plus a consciousness of thought and objects. And third one, the unified mystical state, described as a perceived unity of self-awareness per se with the surrounding objects, an immediate feeling of quasi-physical unity between oneself, objects, and other people. What are the fundamental differences between Theosis and Brahman Bhava? First of all, I will make some remarks about the significance of experience in the school of Indian philosophy and religion. The Sanskrit word anubhava, that means experience, consists from the prefix anu, towards in the direction and the verbal root bu, to exist. By the term experience, we mean the acquired knowledge, the epistemological justifications, and the empirical evidences given in order to prove or certify its certainty. More precisely, by the term experience, we mean the empirical knowledge acquired through the process of knowledge. Vidya. In Advaita, we are talking about two kinds of experience: empirical experience, aparavidya, and trans-empirical experience, paravidya. Brahmanubhava is the experience in which the subject-object duality is completely absent. It is pure experience or pure knowledge. What is currently happening in Brahmanubhava is that the real self, Atman, not the false self, the ego, realizes its true nature by eliminating ignorance that superimposes on Atman names and forms, nama rupa, without any reality. Tat dvam asi, two are that. I refer here at Mundaka Upanishad, where it is mentioned very clear. Brahmaveda Brahmaiva Bhavati. That means the knower of Brahman becomes Brahman. How we understand this becoming? The statement Brahmaveda Brahmaiva Bhavati does not mean a change or an achievement in being. The verbal root bu, from which Bhavati, to become, is derived, means both being and becoming. In the present context, it refers to being, or to being sat in Advaita Vedanta is uncontradicted, untouched by the temporal dimensions. Equally, by identity and realization, we must not understand a real transformation in being. In the knowledge of Brahman, man not becomes something else. Brahmanubhava is not a newly acquired state, but the realization of one's own authentic nature. In this sense, the scriptural texts offer different examples. The final realization is described as a fusion in Brahman, like a drop of dew that merges in the sea, or the closed space in a pot that merges into the universal space after the pot is broken. The empirical frameworks of names and forms, namely nama rupa, that conjugate the individual self, are abolished in Brahmanubhava, just as the names and the forms of rivers are lost in their fusion with the sea. And I quote now from Mundaka Upanishad, as the rivers flowing down become indistinguishable from touching the sea, by renouncing their names and forms, so the enlightened man becoming liberated from names and forms reaches the Purusha shining by itself, which is greater than the greatest. What are the differences between Theosis and Brahmanubhava? And I try in this part of my presentation to emphasize, to highlight these differences. Theosis is a differentiated unity, union, God and man, but Brahmanubhava is undifferentiated unity. It's the experience of non-duality. Atman is Brahman. In Theosis, we find three stages, three spiritual stages. The purgative way, purification; second one, illumination of Theoria; and third one, the unitive way. In Brahmanubhava, we cannot find any stages in this spiritual progress, just achieving non-dual knowledge, paravidya. Becoming in Theosis is in the following sense, and I quote here from Saint Maximus of the Confessor: While he remains with the whole soul and body man by nature, he becomes with the whole soul and body God through grace. Becoming in the Brahmanubhava experience is in the sense of recognize the identity with ultimate reality Brahman through discrimination, Viveka, between what is real and what seems to be real, mithya, because of the ignorance. In Theosis, we speak about an individual spiritual process in the horizon of church. And in the horizon of church, we are in relations with the others, with Christ. But in Brahmanubhava, is just an individual spiritual process. Theosis is a relational mystical experience with God, but Brahmanubhava is a non-relational mystical experience. In Theosis, and this is very important, we speak about the transfiguration of the universe in our own deification. But in the experience of Brahmanubhava, we speak about awareness that the universe is just an illusion, having no reality. In Theosis, there is a conformity of the image of God in us, from us, with the archetype that is Christ. But in Brahmanubhava, we cannot speak something like that. In conclusion, and I will quote now from Father Romanian theologian, Father Dumitru Stăniloae, and he highlights in a very good way the differences and meanings of spirituality in these two traditions. So, Christian spirituality aiming the deification of man and his union with God without confusion with him is based on the belief that there is a personal God who is the supreme source of radiant love and who, valuing man, does not want his confusion with himself, but maintaining and raising him in an eternal dialogue of love. Such spirituality cannot take place where it is state an evolutionary progress of man in connection with the divinity conceived as the impersonal essence. This progress can have no other result than the loss of man in the impersonal divinity. But the personal God, and therefore the supreme source of love, cannot be conceived as a single person, but as a community of persons in the perfect unity.
Dr. Dura,
thank you very much.
Thank you very much for your presentation. If there are questions, please, anybody. I don't see you yet, so if you want to raise a question, just please do it verbally without me naming you, because I'm not able to see your hands now. Please.
I stopped the sharing screen now.
May I ask you?
Yeah, of course. Yes.
Yeah.
Thank you, Dr. Dura, for a really inspiring presentation. And my question would be, do you think that behind these differences that you outlined now between Orthodox Christian experience and doctrine of deification, the Eastern one, there is no possibility to bring them into dialogue with each other? For example, if we compare early Christian situation, of course, we had also in 1st, 2nd centuries very rich Greco-Roman spiritual tradition, Stoic and ancient Platonist. It was not simply philosophy, but as Pierre Hadot demonstrated, it was a way of life. So it was kind of spiritual experience and spiritual practice. But nevertheless, church fathers were very intensively engaged in dialogue with them, and we could say that we would not have any doctrine of deification, Christian deification, what we have now, without this dialogue with them. We borrow not only terminology, but certain concepts and, of course, we transformed them very creatively, but nevertheless, there was ongoing dialogue. So do you think that this is something like this can be possible in our days?
Yeah, and my old theological engagement, thank you very much for the question. My old theological engagement is to put in the visible way the orthodox values of Christianity, of theology, because believe me, there are scholars from the world and they didn't hear about Orthodox, about deification, about what means becoming God in Christianity, in Orthodox theology. More than that, I very much offer value for dialogue between religions, between traditions, between identities. But this dialogue does not mean that I must, lose my identity to be in dialogue with the other. If we are aware about our differences between us, we are able to engage a theological debate beyond the formal so-called interreligious dialogue or intercultural dialogue. Of course, there are some common elements in this experience of Brahmanubhava and Theosic experience from Christianity. For example, both version of spirituality describes the meaning of human life, of human existence that begins here in the empirical realm, if I say so, but transcends it. Our common elements are also, if we can speak some common elements between these two kinds of mystical experiences, can be the ascetic experience in Christianity and the yogic experience, that which is also kind of asceticism and meditation in Hinduism, but in total different way. Also, we can offer importance to knowledge in both of mystical experiences, but the ultimate goal is totally different between Christianity and Hinduism, more precisely Advaita or Vedanta school of philosophy.
Yes, thank you. Anybody else?
Actually, I had a question for I don't know to address to who, but I have a question for my former presenters in this panel. There is a limit in the process of deification, in the sense that we have reached this state and that's it. Or how we must understand this dynamism or progress in deification. If someone...
Father Hadley, would you like to reply to that and then put your own question?
Can you hear me now?
Yeah. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you for your presentation. It's very courageous and very good. I'd like to make some qualifying remarks, which are not meant to be critical, neither of you nor of your paper. But for having worked many years in Asia, my own experience taught me that the only thing that would guarantee a serious and deep ecumenical exchange was very long contacts. Even with the Christian Orthodox communities in Kerala in India, I've taught there in their seminary, it's not easy to talk to each other on serious topics unless we know each other very well. Now that could be extended to all other contexts. There are people like Francis Clooney at Harvard, a Jesuit priest, who has remarkable philological competency. He was a very serious man and a serious Catholic priest, but somehow it's too abstract. And my own limited experience, perhaps not nearly as vast as your own, is that the only thing that gave me real confidence that I was talking to someone and getting through to them and they were getting through to me was years and years of shared prayer, shared presence. I have no problem going to a mosque and sitting through a long service, nor in a Hindu temple. In fact, I enjoy it. But I'm very much on the outside. I worked for 30 years in Java, and I finally said, that's enough. I'm going to go to Moscow, because there I have the same faith as all these Indonesian Muslims. So it's just as secularization is very local, depending upon the country you're in. Ecumenical dialogue to me depends very much on the length of one's depth of one's friendship. Merci. Thank you.
Yeah, I'm totally agree, dear professor. Indeed, the experience with from other religions is not just for time of the conference, few hours or few days. It must take years of the interaction between me and the others and me. I'm totally agree with you, indeed. Thank you.
Perhaps somebody else wishes to answer Dr. Dura's question about theosis being a final point after which nothing more interesting comes or something. Yes. Yeah. Yes, Dr. Zura.
That's really a very interesting question, but I think yesterday was also a discussion about this. Father Alexis was discussing Saint Maximus on this topic, and there are a variety of approaches to be found in church fathers, but I think most of them emphasize that no, it's not it's unending. So you all the time are approaching. For example, now Dr. Skliris also today emphasized this notion of epictasis. We are all the time stretching forward and out towards God, and it never ends. I think this is what we have in Orthodox Christian tradition. Maybe this is one of the differences between us and the Eastern doctrine of Thomas. That's it, I think.
If anybody has a different view, if not, we reach the end of this panel. Yeah, so I think Olga has not managed to make her connection, right, Petre?
Yes, she couldn't make it, but she told me to let you know that she will present her work on Tuesday. So on Tuesday she'll discuss here. You already have the video online if you want to listen to it in advance. And Tuesday she will discuss her presentation with you. Unfortunately, hopefully, fingers crossed, the connection is going to be better next time. I guess we can conclude here our panel. Thank you very much to everyone who was here for discussion, who was involved, and to those who listened to us. And I wish you a great evening, and see you tomorrow. Bye bye.
Nice evening to all. Thank you.
Thank you.